broadcasting on Facebook, so just to be safe.
And the opening flow here when we get started, I'm going to start with Zoom kind of housekeeping, and then pass to Natalie, who's going to thank our sponsors and introduce Ronaldo, and then Ronaldo will introduce the speaker.
Marissa, is that a new link from earlier as well?
Yeah, this is for, so the one that I sent you earlier, just scratch that one.
Okay, got it.
This one. Yeah, that one's not live anymore.
Okay.
Thank you.
Audrey and Crystal, are you okay with the same spotlight flow? We'll prompt everything.
Yep.
Okay. I think I figured out why my view switches, since we're not hosting, and the first time we did it, now the host is someone else's and my view always switches, so I have to go back and make a gallery view.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, my camera is on.
I know, and it worked perfectly last week or 2 weeks ago, so.
It's just for a small heart attack. No problem.
So John, I won't touch the spotlight today unless you tell me.
Perfect, yeah, thank you.
Well, we look good live.
Okay.
All right, we can bring them in if you like.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. All right, I'm going to disable the waiting room. Good morning, everyone. This is a great time to adjust your audio. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone. It's now 10 a.m. here in Arizona. My name is Nick Blum, and I work at the Institute for Human Development at Northern Arizona University. And it brings me great pleasure to be with you here on the closing session of the African American Conference on Disability, brought to you by the Arizona Center for Disability Law. I've been posting some things in the chat, and I'm gonna go over some kind of Zoom accessibility housekeeping verbally. And then after I stop sharing verbally, I'm gonna repost everything into the chat in case people arrived a little late. So the first thing to note is that there's captions available today. If you're in Zoom, there should be a button at the bottom of your screen, live transcript button, CC. You can click that, and there's options for seeing the captioning within Zoom. There's subtitles or a full transcript view. If you're joining us via Facebook, you might have to click the little gear button in the bottom of the video and turn the captions on. Lastly, we have captions going on an external captioning link, which I know is a highly requested feature for many of our participants. I posted that in the chat and we'll post it again. So if you want to see the captions on a separate screen, that can happen too. The second thing is we have ASL interpreters working today. They're co-hosts, their names start with ASL in the list. So if you want to pin their videos yourself, you can go to the participant list and find their names and right click and pin the videos. It's Audrey and Crystal. I also want to highlight, if you move your mouse to the top right-hand corner of the Zoom screen, there's a button that says view. If you click that, you'll see all sorts of view options. This is where you can, I highly recommend a gallery mode, so you can see lots of videos, but you can adjust that how you want. We're going to be showing slides in this presentation. When the slides go up, you might have to readjust your view. One of the slides is going to play a video. And so when that plays, I just want to give a warning that the audio can be different than the speaker's audio. So you might have to turn it down or turn it up when the video starts playing. I think those are everything that I wanted to share this morning. I'm going to be in the chat monitoring technical questions. And again, it's a pleasure to see everyone at the last workday of February here. I'm going to pass it over to Natalie Luna Rose from the Arizona Center for Disability Law. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Again, if you're here for the first time, thank you and welcome. And if you are joining us for our last session and have been here with us throughout the month, thank you again for your support for the African American Conference on Disabilities. My name is Natalie Luna Rose. I am the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Arizona Center for Disability Law. It is an honor to be part of this amazing conference, and I am looking forward to next year's conference. Hopefully we'll see either a lot of you in person or a hybrid, but as we know, things are changing every day when it comes to COVID, so we'll see how that plays out, but we hope for in person. So the Arizona Center for Disability Law, we are a protection advocacy agency. There are every state and territory in the United States has one. We have been the leader, I think, in having a conference like this. And we have received lots of requests and people who have joined us this month from all over. So if in the chat you want to put where you're from, I'm coming to you from my living room in Tucson, Arizona, but we've got my colleagues in Phoenix and Flagstaff, and we've seen people come from the Virgin Islands, New York, Montana, Florida, Washington, DC, San Diego, you name it. I think we've hit just about every state. So it's very exciting. And again, thank you for your support. I'm going to thank our sponsors. We could not have done this conference without their support. So thank you to the Arizona Center for African American Resources, ASGAR, Valley Toyota Dealership, Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Sonoran USED at the University of Arizona, Institute for the Human Development at Northern Arizona University, Diverse Ability Incorporated, Marks the Spot Barbershop, Uniques Media, Valley of the Sun United Way, and of course, the Arizona Center for Disability Law. And speaking of the Arizona Center for Disability Law, I'd like to introduce my colleague and partner in crime during this conference this time, and someone I'm honored to also call a friend, Reynaldo Fowler. He is the founder of this conference, along with David Carey, who unfortunately could not join us today, but I will give it to Reynaldo to introduce Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Natalie. And I hope this has been a learning experience for everyone over the last month. It's been a really great journey for me. And we've had some great workshops. And we have a great speaker today. And we're going to close out. We're going to talk about elections. You know, this has been a real big, important issue for the last year. And so we would like to listen to our Commissioner Hicks today. He's going to close it out for us. Commissioner Thomas Hicks was nominated by President Barack Obama and confirmed unanimously by the United States Senate in December 16, 2014. Commissioner Hicks has served as chairman in 2 terms with the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission. Commissioner Hicks has focused on his efforts to improve voter access. Today, Commissioner Hicks is going to talk about the role and impact of voters with disabilities and people of color on the outcome of the 2020 election. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce Commissioner Thomas Hicks.
Thank you, Ronaldo, and I really do appreciate you inviting me back here again today. This is one of my favorite conferences, and I'm sad to say that we're not in person, but I'm hoping that I want to congratulate you on the 10th anniversary of your conference, but hopefully next year we will all be able to meet in person, or as Natalie said, in some sort of hybrid role. Last year when I came to the conference, it was the last conference that I went to. This is one of my most important conferences. I believe that it's imperative that we meet as much as possible. And so after the conference was over, took a red eye back to DC to speak at another conference here in DC. But so, you know, any opportunity I get to come out and be a part of this, I'm going to take advantage of. So I'm going to turn my camera off and allow Nicholas to start the sharing of the screen. And let's see here, camera, stop video. There we go. Again, hello, I'm Thomas Hicks, Commissioner with the United States Election Assistance Commission, and I want to thank everyone for inviting me here today. This is, like I said, one of my favorite conferences. I'm here to speak to you about the 2020 election and how, amid the challenge of COVID-19, election infrastructure fared to have safe and accessible elections, especially for voters with disabilities. During 2020, the #1 story that we heard about every single day was about COVID-19. The very next story every night was about the election. And so people felt an opportunity to actually participate in the process by voting. And so next slide, please. So everyone, you know, I want to thank everyone who went out to vote. For those of you who didn't go out to vote but are eligible, I ask you to register to vote and participate in the process next time around. We'll have another federal election within 2 years, and this is an opportunity for you to participate in the process. The United States Election Assistance Commission is a bipartisan agency formed after the 2000 election to help election officials improve the administration of elections and help Americans participate in the process. We work closely with state and local election officials every day in order for voters to cast a meaningful ballot on election day. Next slide. Our agency by statute is responsible for distributing federal funds to the states. Most recently, we distributed over $400 million allocated by Congress to provide to the states in emergency funding to deal with elections during COVID-19. You know, I'm proud to say that our agency got that money out within 30 days. You know, other aspects of our agency is that we established the voluntary voting system guidelines for use for voter machines, and we updated those standards 2 weeks ago. So the voluntary voting system guidelines 2.0 will now be out there for states, for manufacturers to use to build to better machines so that it's able for people to be able to cast their votes and have those votes counted accurately. Some of the best things that we do are serving as best practices for state and local authorities so they can consult with us for running elections. And this was very important during COVID-19 so that we could improve the process because states were running 2 voting processes back to back, one in absentee and vote by mail, and another with folks to be able to vote in person. We also maintain the National Voter Registration Form. And here is a short video that will describe our agency. Next slide.
Okay, I'm about to share audio, so just a warning for people if they might have to change the volume.
So, what is the EAC? Glad you asked. EAC stands for Election Assistance Commission, and simply put, our goal is to make your job easier. No, seriously. We were established by the Help America Vote Act of 2002 as an independent, bipartisan commission charged with helping Americans vote. The primary way we do that? By ensuring election officials have the support and resources they need. We help in a few ways. We craft and adopt the voluntary voting system guidelines, accredit test laboratories, and certify voting systems, serve as the nation's clearinghouse of information and best practices related to elections. We also maintain the National Mail Voter Registration Form, which can be used to register to vote, update registration information with a new name or address, or register with a political party, and develop recommendations and standards that address the needs of voters, state and local election leaders, and other election stakeholders. At the end of the day, we work to ensure every eligible American has the opportunities to vote independently, privately, and with confidence in our nation's election system. We do everything in our power to make sure election officials have what they need to support that. Learn more at eac.gov.
Our agency's mission extends to assisting voters with disabilities and seeks to promote accessible elections that allow for independent and maintenance of voter privacy. So since the passage of HAVA in 2002, we've worked with election officials to implement the promise of a private and independent vote. And it should be noted that 3 of the 6 duties assigned to the EAC by HAVA cite assisting people with disabilities as a primary responsibility. In 2020, the challenge of election administration involved making the ballot accessible to more than 38 million Americans with disabilities who are eligible to vote. And this represents 1/6 of the overall population of eligible voters. A broad range of voters, including those who have mobility issues, visual issues, communication issues, and physical disabilities as well. This is the good slide. This is why last February, the EAC hosted a collaborative event to bring together election officials and people with disabilities, election security experts, and disability advocates in a disability and accessibility forum in February of 2020. And we talked about vote by mail, paper ballots, and cutting edge assistant voting technology. And little did we know that the pandemic was going to occur and all of these things would be basically at the forefront of allowing people to cast their ballots independently and privately. Next slide, please. In the 1 month following our event on accessibilities, COVID arrived and took over the country and the world. So it compounded accessibility issues, but the EAC responded by formulating working groups to talk about with election officials, vote by mail and absentee voting, and what sort of things needed to be done during that timeline. Expanding early voting periods for more opportunities for voters with disabilities to practice social distancing while exercising their right to vote. And working with a number of states to adopt new accessible voting technology to provide remote options for voters with disabilities. Now more than 20 states in the District of Columbia offer some sort of electronic ballot delivery. As electronic procedures are implemented in the states and localities, this provides recommendations on meeting accessible requirements. So other guidelines and guidance from COVID-19 resources advise making line and wait times work for voters with disabilities. And now we're in planning documents to anticipate the needs of voters with disabilities as we move forward with the next elections. Our biannual Election Administration and Voting Survey Report, which we call EVES, will provide key information about what happened in the 2020 election, which will be released by June 30th of this year. Next slide, please. In the meantime, after the election, we ran a very brief and targeted survey with Rutgers University about disability and voting access through the 2020 election. That can be held at, that can be seen on our website because we had a hearing last week to talk about some of those findings. Next slide, please. The survey was a national survey of over 2,500 people. The disability portion of that was over 1,700. The non-disability survey sample was just under 800 people, of people reporting no disability. Disabilities range from hearing, visual, cognitive, and mobility, among others. And half of those in the disability sample have had mobility impairments, while 1/8 reported hearing, vision, or cognitive impairments. 1/3 of those folks needed help with their daily activities, and we were happy to find that voting difficulties among people with disabilities declined from the previous survey that we did in 2012. That doesn't mean that everything is hunky-dory and dandy. It means that there's still work to be done, but things are improving. Next slide, please. About 1 in 9 voters with disabilities encountered difficulties in voting in 2020. This is double the rate of people without disabilities, but still a drop from 2012. Among people with disabilities who voted in person, 18% reported difficulties compared with 10% of people without disabilities, and that's down from 30% in 2012. Again, that doesn't mean that things are hunky-dory. It just means that we need to improve the process still. And voting difficulties were most common among people with visual or cognitive impairments. During the general election, we saw a shift to mail-in and absentee voting, and 5% of voters with disabilities had difficulties using a mail ballot, compared with 2% of voters without disabilities. 22% of voters with visual impairments had difficulty using a mail-in ballot. Next slide, please. And 1 in 7, or 14% of voters with disabilities using a mail ballot needed assistance or encountered a problem in voting, compared with only 3% of those folks without disabilities. And only 5 of 6 voters, or 83%, with disabilities voted independently without any difficulties in 2020, compared with over 9 of 10, or 92%, of voters without disabilities. Close to 75% of voters with disabilities voted with a mail ballot or early in person in 2020. This represents a significant increase from 2012 and is higher than 2/3 of non-disabled voters who did so in 2020. People with disabilities voted at a 7% lower rate than people without disabilities, and we need to work to make that higher, pointing towards a continual disability gap in voter turnout. And before I wrap up, and want to go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about January 6th. I spent over a decade working for the United States Congress on Capitol Hill, and it pained me beyond belief to see the Capitol overrun with people who were looking towards destroying our democracy. So, as an African American and a government official, and to speak to folks about the African American, to speak to folks attending the African American Disability Conference, I want to say, you know, things need to improve overall, and we all need to do our part some way, somehow. I don't know what that means, but we all need to figure out a way to get things a little bit better. I will say that being here in Washington, things seem to have improved after January 20th for various reasons. And that's not a partisan poke. That's just more of a, I think people are looking to work towards a common goal. So with that, next slide. If you have questions, that phone number I would not use, but I would say, you know, if you want to email me at thicks@eac.gov or follow me on Twitter at redblue2024, feel free. You know, with that, I want to wrap up my my talk today. I want everyone to stay safe as much as possible. I think we can stop the slides here, and I'll turn the camera on to do my question and answer portion, if need be, or I can just have the camera off. But the last thing that I'll talk about before going towards questions is the vaccine. People in my own family, as African Americans, feel that it's not safe to get the vaccine. I would say that, and the question becomes, well, I don't know what's in that. And Chris Rock has said this, and I'm going to repeat it. Do we really know what's in Tylenol? But we'll still take that. I would say that we all need to get vaccinated as quickly as possible to dwarf this pandemic so that we can all meet again in person. It might not be perfect, but we need to move forward with vaccinations. And I know that our community is hesitant to do that, but I'm, you know, if need be, I'm willing to do it on camera myself. So get vaccinated, stay safe, and I'll be happy to answer questions for the rest of the time. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. We really appreciate your time this morning. And I'm going to, unless Mr. Fowler also wants to join in, I'm going to start going through the chat and see. Okay, there's a question from Patricia Carney. What do you see your role in the next few years? What do you see your role in the next few years as efforts ramp up to restrict voting access?
Well, my efforts will be to ensure that people can still vote independently and privately, and that all eligible voters are able to cast their ballots and have those ballots counted as intended. And when I say intended, as in intended as the way that they've cast their ballots. So if you voted for one candidate, you want that candidate to receive your vote, that's the way that it should be counted. So I think that the agency is working towards that with the approval of the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines 2.0 and moving towards better machines. You won't see those machines tomorrow, but in the next few years. And I think of it this way, in terms of voting machines, it's similar to first generation iPhones. Would you rather have a later edition? I'm not going to say the latest edition, but a later edition of an iPhone or smartphone as opposed to that first generation. So I'm looking at the voting machines now as an earlier variation of what can actually come down the line. And so we need to ensure that voting remains accessible to people. And I think voting by mail aided in that. And so that it's not perfect, but it improves the process. I voted in mail myself this last time around, but for people who want to actually be in the polling place, to ensure that they have accessible means to do so. And that's not just the machines itself, but being able to get into the place to cast their votes. So, so that's what I hope to work on in the next few years or so.
Thank you. Next question. What are the best ways to get involved with voter education and turnout at the government and nonprofit level?
One of the best ways, I think, to become involved is to serve as a poll worker. I think of it as, or election worker. I think of it as one of the best ways to increase confidence that the process is working as intended is to see someone like you at the polling place. So I've always advocated for African Americans to serve as poll workers, because if I walk into a polling place and see an African American there, I'm going to feel more comfortable. That's not a ding at anyone else. That's just more of feeling more comfortable. Last year, we celebrated 100 years of women getting the right to vote. If you have more women serving as poll workers and you're a woman walking into a place, you would feel more comfortable with doing that. So I say this, that you can't always tell of a person's disability by seeing them, but if someone who has a visual or has a disability that someone can see and they are working as a poll worker, I think that gives more confidence to those people who have disabilities who want to go into and work as a poll worker. You're on mute, Natalie.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Next question. How do we ensure election security, but not prohibiting accessibility? Many election security professionals state that only paper ballots are secure, but as we know, they are not fully accessible.
Well, I don't necessarily think that election security is only, how do I say it, that the paper ballots are the only way to secure an election. There has to be more innovative ways that we look at. And I don't have the answer to that, but for electronic security experts, I say come up with a way to ensure that we move beyond paper ballots, because we know that paper ballots are not always accessible. And so I think that getting away from saying that people have to have a hand-marked paper ballot is one way to do that. You know, being able to employ other aspects of it, like Apple or Google or Hewlett-Packard, to also look into these issues in terms of accessibility. I don't have the answer, but I think that there are a lot of smart folks out there who should be able to move forward with these issues. Right now, people are saying that tangible paper ballots are the only way to go. I say, what are we doing to move past that?
Thank you. Is there any work being done to develop a fully online voting option that is secure for people who are blind or visually impaired?
I believe that there are companies out there that are doing sort of the electronic ballot return. I'm not sure of the states that allow for that, but there needs to be some sort of pilot programs put out there that allow for people who need to be able to vote independently and privately, which is all of us, and to make sure that that's accessible. So should there be pilot programs? I would say yes. I think that the electronic security experts should work with the disability community. And when I say work with, I don't mean to talk that they should work to talking down the folks, but actually work with people to come up with a solution, not just to say this is the only way that this should be and you need to deal with it. And how do we move forward? Because talking past each other is not the way to move forward.
Thank you. Question from Shannon. In order to be a poll worker or an election worker, does he or she need to receive any training before getting started?
Many jurisdictions, I would check with your local election office on signing up, but there usually is a 1 or 2 hour course that the people take in order to, or sometimes longer, to serve as a election worker on election day. And so the answer to that is yes. You would want someone to have some sort of training to be a poll worker before serving as a poll worker.
Thank you. Question from Nikki Ott. I live in Iowa, where a bill restricting voter access is awaiting the governor's signature. Many people voice their opposition to this bill, but it is likely it'll be signed into law. What steps would you recommend to help continue advocating for voter access for all?
I would get in touch with the Iowa disability folks and see what they're doing, whether or not they're contemplating lawsuits, whether or not they're contemplating some sort of counter legislation for that. Contact your local election official to voice your opinion about that bill, and contact the governor. If you don't feel that that should be signed into law, exercise your duty to voice your opinion to our elected officials by stating that you do not want this bill to be signed into law. When we were contemplating the voluntary voting system guidelines, we heard from a number of groups on the pluses and minuses of going forward with the voluntary voting system guidelines as written. And we took those into consideration before voting unanimously to move forward with it. And I think that also during our comment period, we listened to all different groups on changes to those sorts of things. But I would also just say, contact those elected officials, because they are the ones that are representing you and your opinions. So not just the loudest folks, but all the folks.
Thank you. Next question. Is there a push for every state to offer online voting? If not, can there be?
Well, I think that each individual state set their own requirements for receiving ballots. When I worked in the Congress back in the late 2000 or early 2000s, 2009, 2010 or so, we worked on what became the MOVE Act, which basically allowed for electronic ballot delivery. There was question and pushback on the return of those ballots, but it significantly cut down the amount of time needed for people to actually receive their ballots. So one of the aspects of that, and it's an improvement, it's not the greatest improvement, but it's an improvement, is to allow for folks to receive their ballots electronically, fill those ballots out, print it out, and send it back. I know that's not a solution for everyone, but it moves the ball forward. And so for each individual state, I would talk to your chief election official to see what sort of things that they are doing to improve the process. Because what works in Oregon is not necessarily going to work in Maine. And so each individual state runs their own election and therefore determines on how to carry out their election processes.
Thank you. Next question. How concerned are you with all these states trying to find ways of voter suppression?
Well, I think voter suppression has been around since there's been elections. The first part of that was when people used to say, hey, Democrats vote on Wednesday, Republicans vote on Thursday. The process now is disinformation and the instantaneous traveling of information over the internet. And so I say that there are a couple of things that need to be done to ensure that people don't have voter suppression put upon them. One is know the rules. So sign up to register to vote. Two, if you have an opportunity to vote early so that you can catch any sort of issue before it becomes irreversible. And third, I think that there is a duty by, and I use my own family as a process here, of my own family talking to me about how they saw something on Facebook and therefore it must be true. I would say go to trusted sources for your information. My Twitter account has been verified by Twitter, and so I have this little blue check mark. The National Association of Secretaries of State had a trusted info page, and the information that they put out is trusted because those are the elected officials who are out there to ensure that votes are counted accurately and cast accurately. And third, I would say sign up as a election worker or poll worker so that you are in the process to ensure that voter suppression does not occur. In terms of legislation, we need to make sure that people are vigilant to ensure that restrictions are not unnecessarily put into place to ensure that everyone who's eligible to vote can cast their vote and have that vote counted accurately.
Okay, we are coming down to, we've got still a few more minutes of questions, Mr. Hicks. So it's been a busy chat and some really good information and links. So I will read a couple of them. They're more comments, but from Juliana, Arizona has a vote coalition, Arizona Disability Vote Coalition. Our first meeting this year will be in March to discuss our goals and strategies for the next 2 years for voters with disabilities in Arizona. If anyone attending this session is interested in joining us, stay tuned for an announcement or let us know. Next question.
Hi, Juliana.
I think we all know Juliana. Hi, Juliana. What mechanisms are in place to ensure states actually implement the accessible voting they claim to offer? And what can we do to hold them accountable?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
What mechanisms are in place to ensure states actually implement the accessible voting they claim to offer? And what can we do to hold them accountable?
I would say to talk to your disability coalition. So every state has a disability coalition that ensures that people who have disabilities should be able to vote and cast their votes independently and privately. Arizona with the Law Center is one of those things. So find out in your state who is advocating for those sorts of things and move forward with that. Also, I would talk to the Secretary of State's office to find out what sort of things they are doing to ensure that you can cast your vote independently and privately. The other aspect of that is that every machine has to go through some sort of logic and accuracy testing, and those are open to the public. So you can go before the election, and obviously during the pandemic, this is a little harder, but going to watch the logic and accuracy testing of those machines to ensure that those are the machines that you can use to cast your ballot is something that I would definitely advocate for. One of the things that I wanted to do in my voting for the voluntary voting system guidelines is that we move away from this one machine aspect of every polling place has one machine that is used for people who have disabilities to be able to vote independently and privately. My thought is that someday, hopefully soon, we'll have all the machines being able to have the same sort of capabilities to cast your vote and have your vote counted accurately. And so there's not some sort of segregation of machines, that everyone has that same aspect.
Thank you. There was a question from Steve. He writes, what about national mail-in voting?
As in,
I'm
I
guessing,
don't get the question.
I'm guessing, you know, can a national mail-in voting be implemented?
I would say no, because each state casts their own ballots and have those ballots counted statewide. But for federal elections, in the way that I'm interpreting the question, each state implements their own national vote by mail. And it should not be, it should be known that this is not new for 2020, that every state had an absentee and vote by mail process before 2020. It was just scaled up in order to accommodate the mass volume of people casting their votes. 2020, it should not be, you know, looked down upon that was the most that anyone has, that the entire country has ever participated in the election. It was over almost 180 million people cast ballots, or 100 was 75 and 80, so almost 180 million people, I would say. My math is wrong, but the most amount of people ever cast ballots, and an overwhelming number of those cast them via the mail. So it's not going to be a national campaign in terms of I'm voting for one candidate in Oregon, and then that ballot's going to count. If it's not going to be one ballot for the entire country, so it's still going to be, each state is going to run their own election and therefore cast their ballots on that for those federal elections.
Any chance that the federal government will step in and create some universal accessible voting standards?
Well, some of those were done with the voluntary voting system guidelines. So we, under 2.0, we did set some sort of some standards for that. It should be noted that the Help America Vote Act in 2002 was the first time that it was put in place in writing to say that people who have disabilities have a right to vote independently and privately. For additional standards, I would say to definitely talk to your member of Congress that additional standards need to be put into place. And that's the way that the federal government will implement those sorts of things.
Thank you. Any other questions? We've got about like 5 more minutes before we can do a wrap up. Commissioner Hicks, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would definitely add that, you know, I'm really happy for the questions that we received here today. I really want folks to stay safe. I really want folks to participate in the process. I read some statistics about how folks who have disabilities were voting at a lower rate than those folks who don't have disabilities. And the question, and I know that, you know, there's a number of reasons why, that people are underemployed, have transportation issues, have accessibility issues, but there has to be some sort of way that we can work together to bring those numbers in line with those folks who don't have disabilities. And so, you know, conferences like these I think, do a great job of bringing people together. I'm really saddened that we weren't able to meet in person because I always take a lot away from these conferences to see what sort of things are out there, what sort of things that we can be doing. But I do think that things are better than they were even 5 years ago in terms of accessibility. I'm going to continually work with my fellow commissioners to ensure that those who have disabilities can vote independently and privately. And I think that there's other ways that we can do to push to ensure that there's other aspects of this. For instance, you know, the agency is looking towards having our own disability division. And that's something that we wouldn't be able to talk about less than two years ago, because the agency's funding was constantly being cut. And last year, we actually got a boost in our funding so that we are looking at adding folks who would be able to work as a full-time role in a disability division. And right now, it's looked at as one FTE, which is a full-time equivalent. But hopefully soon, you know, with your help in pushing Congress to increase our funding, that we can add 2, 3, 4 people so that we can actually have a true division to talk about these issues and improve the process for everyone. Because I think of it this way, I always think of it as I did 4 or 5 videos recently on Black History Month and election officials who are African American and working in elections. And the aspect of that, at the end of the day, was Black history is American history. And so I think of it as, if we are able to make sure that those who have disabilities can vote independently and privately, that's going to improve the process overall, not just for that community, but for all communities. And so, you know, that's where I would, you know, end on and look towards ways to improve the process. And hopefully next year we can have another conference on disability access like we did in 2020, because I think that we learned a lot from that. And we have a couple of employees who push to say we don't want to just have conferences to have conferences, but to have conferences that have action behind it. And so what sort of things can we do to have action behind this? I think that's where we can go.
Well, thank you. Great message and excellent closing. I will agree with you, Mandela. So I'm again going to turn it over to Reynaldo Fowler. I just wanted to sign off myself and say thank you so much for joining us for this month-long African American Conference on Disabilities. It's been a real honor to be a part of it. And I'm going to head it over to my colleague, Reynaldo.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Commissioner Hicks. We really appreciate the words of wisdom, and we hope to see you next year in person. If not, we will definitely do something virtual. And thank you much, and I appreciate it. If is JC, are you on board? So we're gonna close it out. But before we close it out, I really want to thank everyone who participated in the last month. If you participated the entire month or you just participated in one workshop, this could not have happened without our partners. And I want to thank our sponsors. It's so important for you to understand that for us to do this conference over the last 10 years, it has been a labor of love and building partnerships. And I also want to thank our partner, the Arizona Center for African American Resources, Valley Toyota Dealers, the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, who paid for some of the sign language and card services, the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, for the Hard of Hearing, the Sonoran USET down at the University of Arizona, the Institute for Human Development at Northern Arizona University, our tech team, Jeff, our Nick, and John. We greatly appreciate it. We could not do it without them. So please give them applause, virtual applause, because our team has done a great job. Our cart services, our interpreters, the entire staff, and everyone that worked to make sure that this conference is very successful. I also want to thank Diversibility, Marks the Spot Barbershop, Just Unique Media, Valley of the Sun United Way, the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and all of our partners. It's just been a real ride. Please, this is what we've done for the last 10 years. If you want to be part of it, please stay in touch with us. Natalie has given you our contact information. The information will be up on the Arizona Center for Disability Law website, the PowerPoint, the videos. They're also available in Facebook. So that's pretty much what I have to say. Thank you, Wendy, Erica, Kelly, for your support of the conference, and the staff at Arizona Center for Disability Law. Please travel safe and have a great day, and looking forward to seeing you next year in 2022. Have a great day. Take it over, Nick.
I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day.